A man drives a pick into the wall of a trench, and the point stops dead. He is in the Priest's Wood, on the ground between Pont-a-Mousson and Verdun. The wall he is cutting into is not soil. It is the fourth or fifth thing that has been done to this hillside, and everything that was done to it before is still in there. He works the handle. He pulls. The point comes free with a slimy knot hanging off the steel, and when he bends down to look at what he has pulled out of the wall, it is human intestine. Somebody is buried here. And the man stops. Not for a second. He stands in the trench with the pick in his hands, and 3 words go through him like a vice. Ein toter Mensch. A dead human being. Not a dead Frenchman. Not a dead German. And he writes down what it does to him. From this on, he cannot walk past a body without stopping to look at its face. Who were you? Who is mourning you? And then, in the same breath, the sentence almost nobody quotes. Never do I ask, why did you have to die? Never, who is to blame? He is standing over a man he has just pulled out of a wall. He has worked out that the dead have no country. And he decides, then and there, not to ask who put him in it. He wrote all of that down 17 years later in a book about his own youth. 4 short lines and a refusal. He never says which afternoon. There is no date on it anywhere in the book. What is dated is what sits on either side of it. 18 days before he was taken off that line, the Army made him an officer candidate. And in April, the month they took him off it, he applied to become a fighter pilot. And all 3 of those things are written down in the same book, inside 6 pages, by him. His name was Ernst Toller, and in the summer of 1914, he was 20 years old and not in Germany. He was a student in Grenoble, in France. And when the war came, he did what a great many young men in Europe did that August. He went home to enlist. He crossed the border, traveled to Munich, and on the 9th of August, he volunteered. A historian who went through his army file a century later put it flatly, he seems to have decided before he got off the train. Toller was Jewish. He had grown up in a small town in the Prussian East, in a province where being German was something you could be told you were not. Years later, a doctor who examined him, a man working for the prosecution, a man with no reason on earth to be generous about him, wrote down why he thought Toller had gone. It was a matter of course to him, the doctor wrote, to rush to the colors, to prove as a Jew that he felt German. He reached the front on the 31st of March, 1915. In June, they moved him into the Priest's Wood. The Priest's Wood was a hill with a wood on it and a blockhouse near the top. 300 meters to the right of where Toller was posted, that blockhouse had changed hands so many times that nobody was keeping count. French, German, German-French. The men called it the Hexenkessel, the Witches Cauldron. And in front of it, because neither side had held it long enough to clear it, there was a pile. German and French dead, tangled into each other, arms across each other's backs. Toller's own word for how they lay was an embrace. He was a gunner. For part of that year, his job was to sit in a listening post out in front of the line and work out where the enemy guns were by their sound. In February of 1916, at Verdun, the war changed its character. He was not in that battle. He heard what it did to the shape of the thing he was already inside. Later, he wrote his own summary of those months. Grand sentiments grow hollow. Big words, small. War becomes normality and front service daily work. Heroes become victims. We are all of us screws in a machine that throws itself forward, though it is not clear in which direction. He is describing exhaustion. It is real, and it is not the same thing as a changed conviction. The army kept a file on Ernst Toller. It is still there in the Bavarian State Archive in 3 volumes with shelf marks. On the 3rd of March, 1916, that file records that he was made a non-commissioned officer. 13 days later, it records something else. Offiziersaspirant. Officer candidate. It means he had formally entered the running for a commission. It means that in the middle of March 1916, Ernst Toller was applying to lead men in this war for the rest of it. That is 18 days before they took him off that line. On the 3rd of April, they took him off it. And that same month, still in uniform, he put in for a transfer. He wanted the aviation corps. What he wanted was not an exit, and he says so. He wanted out of the mass, out of mass life, out of mass death. The historian who went through his file reads that as a man reaching for the last figure in the war anyone could still describe in the old vocabulary. A night of the clouds. A personal fight, man against man, with some respect left in it for the person he was fighting. He was not asking for peace. He was asking for a better war. So he puts the application in, and he waits. Up there, a man still fights one man at a time. Up there, he will be able to see who he is fighting. He is going to fly. There is no aviation post anywhere in the file. Not a posting, not a transfer, not a line. Whatever came back, it was no. Within weeks, he was in a field hospital, then a nerve clinic. In January 1917, the army let him go for good. And the word it used for what was wrong with him was Kriegsneurose, war neurosis. So, officer candidate, the 3 words, the fighter pilot. Page 68, page 69, page 73. The middle one is written like scripture. The other 2 are written like housekeeping. The book those pages are in was published in 1933. It is called Eine Jugend in Deutschland, A Youth in Germany, and Toller wrote it 17 years after the trench, as a man in his late 30s, in a Germany that was in the act of throwing him out of it. The historian who read that file puts it about as gently as it can be put. There can be little doubt, he writes, that the text is retrospectively stylized and dramatized. And then he says the other half. Although the idea of brotherly love may well have gained ground in the trenches itself, in 1924, Toller collected his poems into a much smaller book. They are arranged with a year printed above each one. There is one in there about the priest's wood. It is a short poem, and it is not a good taste poem. It opens on a dunghill of rotting human bodies, glassed-over eyes, split skulls, and then a phrase for what is lying spilled on the ground, spat-out entrails. Then it turns and speaks to the women of France and the women of Germany, and it tells them to look at what their husbands are doing, groping with shredded hands at the swollen bodies of their enemies. The gesture, corpse stiff, becoming a brotherly breath. Yes, it says, they are embracing each other. The year printed above that poem is 1916. Both of the things the famous passage is built on were already on paper, in his own hand, 17 years before it. The spilled entrails, the enemy dead as brothers. He did not invent the feeling in 1933. What 1933 gave it was a single body, a pick, 3 words, an afternoon, a date. It gave a slow thing a scene. It did not happen in the trench. The army released him in January 1917. For 3 months, nothing. He was tired of politics. He was tired of pacifism. He was mostly interested in literature and in his own condition. In April, he enrolled at the university in Munich in a seminar on literary criticism and German prose style. And that is where it starts. Not because of the seminar, because of who was sitting in it. He was 23. He had come out of the army with a diagnosis and no plans, living on his own problems and on books. In that room, for the first time in his life, he was among people his own age who thought as he did. He called them friends. It is the first time the word appears about anyone. That summer, one of them put a book in his hands. It was called A Call to Socialism, and it had been written 3 years before the war by an anarchist philosopher named Gustav Landauer. Toller read it. And what he said about that afterwards, about a book, in a room, in the summer of 1917, is that it touched him and defined him decisively. He wrote that in 1933 as well. Same book. Page 84. One is a man saying a book changed his mind. The other is a man saying it happened on an afternoon, in one place, to one body. A book, in a room, in a university town, and a little over a year from the priest's wood. After that, it moves quickly. He started writing a play. In the autumn, he went to a conference of the great and the good and begged them to lead, and they did not. In November, he was elected president of a youth league he had written the founding statement for himself. In December, he wrote his first letter to Landauer. In January 1918, he met a theater critic turned agitator named Kurt Eisner. On the 27th, he sat in a Munich beer hall and heard Eisner call for a strike. 4 days later, between 8,000 and 9,000 munitions workers walked out. Eisner was arrested that evening. And on the 1st of February 1918, Ernst Toller stood up in front of the strikers and spoke. Somebody who was there wrote down what it looked like. He shook as though he had a fever. He foamed at the lips. He kept starting sentences with, "You mothers," and "you brothers and sisters," and women in the crowd wept or went wild. He led 3,000 of them to police headquarters to demand Eisner back. 4 days later, there was a warrant out for him. High treason. They put him in the military prison on the Leonrodstrasse. And in that cell, he finished the play. It is about a soldier who goes to war a patriot and comes out of it a different man entirely. He called it Die Wandlung, the transformation. He wrote the transformation in a prison in Munich in the spring of 1918, 2 years after he left the front. Standing over that body in the priest's wood, he had decided not to ask who was to blame. He started asking in Munich in the winter of 1918. He asked it out loud, in front of 3,000 people, and they put him in a cell for it. In April 1919, the Bavarian Revolution made him, briefly, one of the men running a republic. He commanded troops at Dachau, which at that point in history was a town north of Munich. He won. Just under 50 prisoners, 5 officers, and 36 men. An order came from Munich to put the officers in front of a drumhead court. He wrote later that he tore it up. Magnanimity toward a beaten enemy, he said, is the virtue of a revolution. 5 years in a fortress. The rest of the plays. Then 1933, the year he wrote the book, and the year they burned it. He was on the very first list of Germans stripped of their citizenship. London, Hollywood, New York. He spent his last strength raising money for the civilian victims of the war in Spain. On the 22nd of May, 1939, in a hotel room in Manhattan, Ernst Toller hanged himself with the cord of his bathrobe. He was 45. The poet W.H. Auden wrote something for him that year. It calls him one who was egotistical and brave, and it declines very deliberately to pick one. He did all of it. The strike, the cell, the prisoners he let live, the 5 years, the plays, the exile. Nothing about the 6 pages takes any of that away from him. What he could not do was remember it slowly. From the day the army let him go to the day the prison did was 19 months, and it took all of them. A seminar room, a book by a man he had not met yet, and a war that ground him down so gradually that no single day of it was the day. So when he sat down in 1933, with the fire already lit under his own country, he did what people do. He found the afternoon it must have happened on, and he gave it a body and a pick and 3 words.